Consider the conservative, bland nature of ordinary existence is for a particular purpose that can be described for unordinary people. That the blandness of ordinary existence is for the sake of continuity. The full firm name is, by the way, continuity and transition. But seeing as how it is a very hot summer day, and it's something extraordinary may happen, we only have time to cover it all. The first partner, continuity. Continuity, besides the primary world, which continuity at the primary level, quite obviously, for one instance, to get you up on the diving board at least, you could look at it as being the sexual nature of a polarized world, of being the sexes, the combination of different strains of genes, and there is a continuity. That elephants produce, by and large, little elephants. And Republicans produce little Republicans. So there is a continuity, and of course it is in what used to be called the natural world with trees. And mountains only produce other little mountains. But now let's get into the singular world of man's secondary domain, which is tied absolutely to, based inescapably to his intellect, to that high end of the nervous system that now talks and makes noises that sometimes pass for being intelligible. If you pass fast enough. A carpenter told me that joke. Continuity, in the sense that I was going to try and get you to consider to start with, that is, that a kind of blandness, a kind of sameness, a kind of extreme conservativeness over an overall picture of existence is for the sake of continuity. But now going beyond the primary into the secondary, continuity in and via speech. We are surrounded by examples. Some of them we have mentioned on other occasions, and so since we're familiar with them and know that most of them will not spot the furniture or do any damage, I was going to use a couple of them again. They're right up to date. How about interviews of all natures, whether it be with a famous person or whether it be with just an ordinary person, that they ask, what did you think when you saw the hotel on fire? Or what happened when the new government of that country said, we're going to hold you as a hostage, were you fearful? Now, constantly going on nowadays is almost a part of the verbal landscape of humanity, that the interviewee will pick up a part of the interviewer, the reporter's question, and use it as part of his response. I don't even know how many of you have ever taken notice of it, but now it is so common that it would not be unusual if you were just sitting there at ordinary autopilot watching TV, which is, I'll admit, about all that's required. Not just TV, the city. But such things as, and when I say reporter, you understand, and interviewee, we're not limiting it to actual some reporter on a TV station. It could be a congressional committee. It could be you talking to someone else. But oftentimes it's easier to start out with what appears to be out there so that you feel like there's some distance from it, and you can feel a certain amount of comfort that they will ask someone. It can be a Secretary of State. This has got nothing to do with intelligence nowadays. They can ask a prime minister of somebody. They can ask an ordinary person, and the reporter, the interviewer, will say something such as, do you believe that if we do not take some sort of unilateral action now that some of our allies may begin to drift away from our position? And here it is, a man with all sorts of credentials, a man from the Brahmin class of civics and government, and he will say, Senator, I believe that some of our allies might begin to drift away from our current position. When it gets down to a lower level, if it's more immediate, if it's not apparently even that complex, that the reporter will say, well, when they're asking somebody that was a witness to a bank robbery, when the man ran out, I guess you were scared to death. And he says, I was scared to death when he ran out. Now, he might elaborate a little bit, but surely all of you hear that this goes on now continually. Now, we could take 2 or 3 physicians if we were psychologists. If we had nothing better to do than be psychologists, I could make up all sorts of stuff that would fly. Big deal. And say, well, it conserves effort to think. That it's a kind of stalling tactic that the interviewee, when they say, well, I guess your book now, say they're interviewing an author, I guess your book now being 3 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, I guess that's quite a pleasant surprise for a first-time author. And the guy said, for a first-time author, that kind of recognition, boy, is a surprise. And, of course, I am just delighted, and then you might go on a little bit. And we could take a psychological position and say, well, it gives the guy time to stall and go, well, yes, and repeat part of the question. There's a lot better information available than that. What it amounts to, if you can begin to see it, it is, if you needed it, an absolute, hard, oral, visual, but we're talking about speech mainly, example of the dance of a partnership going on in life that is a kind of continuity that can be apparently between strangers, can be between apparent adversaries, such as a Senate committee interviewing a Secretary of State or a Secretary of Defense. Or it can be just a reporter, just an absolute stranger walk up to somebody and say, were you here when the hotel caught on fire and people began to jump out? I bet that was a shock. It can range all the way from that to adversarial positions, to strangers, to friends. And it is an absolute staring you in the face example of the need for that kind of stable, conservative continuity of life in the secondary world wherein it is a continual overlapping. It is the end of one person's beginning is the beginning of somebody else's beginning. It is sometimes in music they used to call it grabbing somebody's pickup notes. If we're playing jazz, the saxophone player takes a chorus and the trombone player is going to come in. And sometimes he'll come in and grab the last 2 or 3 notes that the saxophone player did, or maybe even play on top of it. These kind of sentences, and when we say sentences now, look at it as being energy segments of life, because sentences are simply the clothing on it. It's the noise that energy is making that is humanly translatable. It is energy, but it comes out in words, and this sort of thing of picking up the last part of somebody's sentence is not laziness, it's not stalling for time, although you can use it if you want to write a book on psychology and you might be famous for 2 or 3 weeks. Because it will work, but it's something else. What it has to do with is continuity. It has to do with amidst that which seems to be episodic, that which seems to be the sentences of secondary ordinary man, trying to always have a noun, a verb, and then some object to it. And so it seems to be that there is the appearance, there is the operational appearance that little sentences come and go, and you can say something, you can say, well, I think so-and-so, and somebody go, well, But it is not that kind of abruptness. We've already covered from all sorts of ways about what it was not, that it is operationally that way, and it serves a purpose. But now if you'll expand the vision of it, even amidst that first view that you can see in a certain way, that sentences, thoughts, the consciousness, as it's called, of man actually runs episodically. It's the only way sentences make sense, and if sentences do not make sense to ordinary, wired and primed intellects, then nothing makes sense. They cannot think unless they can think in sentences by common agreement. You want me to say by man? By life. By man. So yes, that sentence makes sense. I can understand that, whether I agree with it or not. It has to be apparently with a beginning and an end. There is a continuity to it. It does not stop. There is, in the media, something else we mentioned. If you can stretch it right quick, these kinds of things that we've even noted, taking like a local news show or any kind of news show is a great one now, that they will continually put in promos and teasers, I think they still call them, of what's coming up. In other words, you got a 30-minute show, and God knows, I've never clocked it, how much of that 30 minutes is spent of the usable time, the editorial time, of not actual news, but of saying what's coming up after the next commercial. And one time made a little joke that some of you liked, or maybe had Kairoot to point that in a secondary sense, if somebody was really, really subversively efficient, you could expand the teasers and the promos to 30 minutes and never have a show. And some of you laughed. And it wasn't just a joke, because that would be, in one sense, if you can, we've got to get beyond 3 dimensions, that would be the ultimate continuity, that you have transitioned yourself. That apparently you're going somewhere and you never go anywhere except there is a continuity to it. Stay tuned for these stories. After which, and they give a little promo, after which these stories will come up such and such, followed by, stay tuned by so-and-so. Well, I see our time's out. But at any rate, you could look at, and of course we could say from another psychological or city view, that doing that in the midst of a show is one way to cut down on expenses. Because the more time that you spend actually putting in promos and teasers about what's coming up, that stay tuned, because we'll be going live to Omaha. We'll be going live to Berlin to get the comments of so-and-so. Now, every time they can spend 15 seconds, and that's 15 seconds that they do not have to fill up with actual news. They just say what's coming up. So we could say, well, that's laziness. We could say that they're trying to save money. We could say it's inefficiency. Tut-tut. You could say that, but you could also say it is the height of efficiency. You could just say that you're so dumb that you're sitting there being a critic. You're being one part of life that's wanting to tell the other part, got you. You're saying, hi, trying to insult my intelligence. You know, especially since I pointed out to you, you sit there now and say, look what they're doing. I tuned in to watch the news. They're going to try to sell me products so that indirectly I end up paying for this. Even though it's over-the-air broadcasting, I am probably going to be influenced subliminally by the advertising and may go spend money. And so I am, in a sense, paying for this. And what an insult they attempt to do to my intelligence, because they are doing more and more, which they have been. More and more of these teasers about stay tuned, and they take up more and more of the time saying what's coming up rather than giving me the good news that I need. You could say that, but if you weren't part of that scenario, you could also say, my God, if I could be as efficient as that, and it's not NBC and it's not ABC, it's that great network of LIFE. But there is a way in which you could see that these promos, these teasers in a show, in a program, and now program, leave us jump symbolically at least, and say into thing-oriented, episodic consciousness. That what this sort of thing does when you're picking up the tail end of somebody else's words, when you take their question and you use the question as part of your response, or instead of actually saying something, you keep saying what you're going to say. Stay tuned. I've got some great ideas. Stay tuned. You'll love them. This is a kind of hyper-efficiency at another level, because it takes what would otherwise be episodic consciousness and it gives it, at the very least, a kind of patina of seamlessness. Well, it's made up of these thing-oriented, episodic sentences that must have an apparent end, that must have an apparent object for the human intellect to continue to feed and to transfer information and energy. And yet, amidst that, it gives this kind of, if you ride by real fast with a carload of carpenters on a weekend, it gives almost this sensation that there is a kind of seamlessness to it. That you can, if you looked at it another way, turn on, whatever time at 7 o'clock, and turn on the ABC News and sit through it all, commercials, warts, promos, teasers, the whole thing, and then at the end, 7:29, they're going off and rolling the credits, and feel as though, if you were asked in a certain way, that that was the ABC News. That was a show. Of course, then you've got the kind of conclusiveness to the 30-minute show, but for that 30 minutes, it was like a seamlessness. I mean, you're used to it. You know that they're going to do certain kinds of promos. You know that maybe that network, I don't know, but maybe that one, not only will the anchor person say, coming up, stay tuned as such and such, they may be one of the ones, let's say that they do this consistently, that they even flash to Berlin, to the guy that's going to do the story, and even kill more time. That the anchor person says, all right, stay tuned, and we'll be going live to Berlin. Where? Are you there, Ralph? And they'll flash to Ralph, and Ralph will say yes, and he'll say, well, Ralph, you're going to be having the story about what's going on there post-elections. Yes, I will. And then they go back to the anchor guy, and they say, so stay tuned for a live report from good old Ralph live in Berlin. So now they've taken what could have been just a 10-second and drug it out to 30 seconds. All of that you could be accustomed to. Let us say that you are accustomed to watching ABC News. So to you, there is a kind of real continuity. So let's say, and I'm not attacking that. There's no qualitative judgment involved, but let's say to you that is identifiable. If you were asked, that is the ABC News. Continuity. Outside the media, there's something else. The latest term for it is nothing all that new, but the latest term in our lifetime, last several decades, is psychologically, they were calling it, I guess it's still popular enough for you people to have heard of it, the stages of life. And several psychologists had some popular books, and they'd cut it up into 5 or 7 or whatever it was, that you were like a child, and then you were an adolescent, and then you were a young adult, and then you were middle age. And it was showing and trying to tell just in a kind of popular way to the mass audience that might buy a book and not necessarily go into analysis with the author, but showing what? A kind of continuity. That it is not unusual, people would say the author as he sat there on the show, it is not unusual to feel a kind of sudden little break once you leave home and you have to go to college. And you get there and you think, well, it's going to be great, I'll love it. And there's a kind of excitement, but be prepared for, what will we call it, mixed feelings. That you'll be there, and probably the first night or so that you're there in the dorm, and you're grown. I mean, you're a young adult, let's say. And so you're not actually frightened of being away from home. And yet there is a kind of longing, a kind of loss, that you're no longer the innocent young teenager that used to hold up in the bathroom with Playboy. You're now a young adult. And let's say you're a young adult, and then you fall in love. And then you get married. And you think, yes, I love this other person, I want to be with them. And yet the day you actually go through the marriage ceremony and you get through, and you have a few glasses of wine, you get to the hotel and you get all the rice, and maybe later you suddenly go in the bathroom, you look in the mirror and you think, my God, what have I done? But the psychologist, all right, now follow, the psychologist then says not to be alarmed, because he is then, don't let your ordinary consciousness pull you away, or you'll think that I've taken the opposite position, which is all right. Except it's not. They call it the stages of life, and they say that all of this, although it would appear to be kind of distinct and oftentimes abrupt, abrasive, disturbing changes in your life, not to worry. There is a continuity because we all go through it. It is the stages, and all they're saying is there is a continuity. Conversely, if you'd like to look at it conversely, those of you that are not wearing kids, look at it from another view. How life simultaneously produces some of those great services, if not products, I'll leave it to you what you want to call it, known as booze and drugs. Not only produces it, but simultaneously, continually, has half a life going tut, tut, tut about booze. Let's just say booze, but drugs of all sorts. Since we all know that booze is a drug now, but let's say just booze right quick. The thing is, what does it do? I mean, besides make you act silly and dumb, in a sense, what it does to just, let's say ordinary people, we're not talking about bums or alcoholics, just people who drink, sometimes socially. What does it do in a way that can be described vis-a-vis what we're talking about now? It interferes with individual continuity. That a person, just an average person that drinks, goes to a party once or twice a month or something, that kind of person, they can, if they have a little too many drinks, what do? Now this side of getting in a fist fight there with somebody they know or wrecking their car, but just what do they do? The continuity that everyone else that knows them, their mate, their friends, their employers and employees and people there that associate with, if it goes just a little bit too far, and it doesn't take much either way, the continuity of what they appear to be is interfered with. And assuming other people are less being disjointed in their continuity of their so-called personality, they find it disturbing, offensive, but they at least find it disturbing. You know, you're not yourself. Think about it. That the continuity that, boy, I wish you wouldn't do that. That's, ooh. And of course, when it gets too far, I was stopping this far, fist fights and all that, but as you all know, common complaints, the woman says my old man gets drunk and he'll prone to come home and holler, how come we don't have any peanut butter? And then suddenly floor me. There is great value that's not identified as such placed on continuity. People call it other things, and they're making their own observations, but it is not down to the level of the energy needs of feeding, of distributing energy inside the life of life through man, on the basis that there must be a continuity in the same way that there is a sexual and genetic continuity if we're talking about the primary level, but there's got to be one at the secondary level. You might also care to note that from this kind of view is another way to say that there is, based upon this, that there is no real everyday need or expectation of surprising, exciting speech or thought, ideas. There's not. Now, people will say otherwise. I know that because, again, you got to remember that life has primed everyone, except the anomalies and the people at the fringe. But the middle of life's bell curve, life has primed everyone that their one desire in life, their one desire is to go to Quito. And nobody can get there. No matter what you do, you know, Ecuador might as well be Shangri-La. You'll never get there. So remembering that, then I am obviously aware that people believe that they are seeking exciting ideas. What is entertainment? What is a large part of contemporary people in our part of the world? What is your time spent with if you're ordinary? A lot of it now is seeking to be entertained. I imagine that you don't even work 1/3 of the day, most people nowadays. And they seek some form of stimulation, as they should. But if you can take a certain view that is a little expanded above the ordinary three-dimensional view, there is really no need, there is no demand, and there is really no expectation for what we could easily call real exciting, surprising information or ideas or speech. Now, you may think that you are a bohemian at heart, or that if you had been older, you'd have been a beatnik, that you're a free spirit. Well, let's assume that you're not too much of a free spirit so that you belong down the gutter, right at the fringes, but let's assume that you actually believe, or you have in the past, that, oh, I would love to have more excitement in my life. Now, you may, at a primary level, at a more primary level, of trying to chase down sex and drugs, but we're talking about the secondary level. There is no expectation. It would be contrary to the basic conservative orderly growth of life at the secondary level through man, if indeed ideas, if indeed speech, not at the fringes, not somebody over there in Hyde Park hollering out, stuff the queen, let's all take off our clothes and eat chestnuts and do away with private property. You know, nobody cares about that. We're talking about if in the middle of the city, if in the midst of London, if in the midst of the civilized bell curve of life in man, if that started, that every day you were from what you considered, you never analyzed, but what you would consider to be reliable, dependable sources of information, your government, your church, your religion, your community, your culture, that if instead of that same old bland, predictable stuff that people can say, boy, Don't you get enough of that? No, sir. I know life makes people say, boy, I've had enough of that. I know life makes you say that, but you have not. Face it. If in some way enough people had enough, what would we be doing? You would have thrown the rascals out. It would have been spring in Prague again. All the ideas of how can people stand to live under some tyrannical government? How can they stand to live under this same dictatorship? If it reaches a time that life, or if you're ordinary and want to talk about people, then the rhetorical, if not real, question about how can they stand to do it when the time comes that they can't? It's goodbye, Tito. Of course, he up and died on them, but it's goodbye, dictator. If people, don't get in any way choking on this because I was just taking off a side view. If indeed people are captains of their fate, and if it were true that people, large numbers of ordinary people in the city went, Jesus, I've had it. It's the same old ideas. People say the same thing. That kid in the car route about the news, he was right. Why do they call it the news? The only reason I can figure they call it the news is because there is nothing new, except those little anomalies now and then that you suddenly pick up or turn on the TV. Iraq has invaded Kuwait. Uh-oh. Am I old enough to be drafted? But that is not the everyday news. That's why it is so juicy. But that is not the way life grows. That is not the orderly march of progress. There is no need, there is no demand, there is no expectation for exciting ideas. Not real exciting. There's no way to really stay in, if I was going to attempt to prove that, because ordinary people could just dismiss that out of hand. And I could join right in with them. I could speak for them before they could speak, while they were still stalling around and say, wait a minute. See, they'd be playing, are you saying that exciting ideas, there's no demand? Of course, they'd be stalling trying to come up with something. I could say, hey, forget it, I'll do it for you. And I could say it. And I could explain and show how, well, that's not true. If there's anything that's not true, it's that. Because the whole world is seeking for it. That's why people turn on the news. They want some excitement. They want to hear new ideas. That's why people go back to school. That's why people even go out and have a few drinks and want to discuss things. It's not true. There is a quite conservative continuity to life. When it breaks, it is frightening. When it happens, and if you notice the way life is arranged, it has nothing to do with the people involved. But the places where there is no continuity are the places that are dying. The cultures, the country, sometimes it's not unusual, all the people are absolutely starving. There is no continuity. They continue. It's one coup after another. It's like, if this is Thursday, it's probably a coup day. The news magazines, there's some of the countries in the world, if you hadn't noticed, they don't even bother to keep up anymore because you don't know who it is. Somebody, they overthrow one guy, and that's Thursday, and by the time next week's news week comes out, it's somebody else. Without continuity, you have no stability. You have actually, in a sense, no viable city, wherever it is. Whatever the governmental name could be placed on it, whether it was a state, a city, you understand what I'm saying. The people. There is no cohesive unit that's going to grow. It is not an organism. It is a stillbirth. It is not going to be, if we're going back metaphorically, it's not a human that is going to live. Or if it's going to live, it is so deformed. We're going to have to look after the kid because he is not going to grow up to be a linebacker, nor an atomic physicist, nor a musician. Continuity, a certain kind of blandness, a kind of stability that is in opposition to what could be real exciting thought and speech. That is absolutely necessary. I would point out, how about this? If any of you want another view, this is in part the otherwise indefensible, as they would call it. I'm just using kind of terms that I have heard about. But it's the kind of indefensible attraction that ordinary people have for madmen and maniacs. I mean, notice. I don't keep track, but I wouldn't be at all surprised by now if damn near there's probably enough books about Hitler as there is Jesus or Buddha. And you ask an ordinary person, or you don't have to ask them. Just some guy, and they say, here is a famous author on the life of Joseph Stalin or Hitler, and the first thing the guy will do is what? He's going to apologize for his dance. Well, now, wait a minute, I'm not sure I'd call this a biography. It's not like I was trying to write up the man's life. It appears to be indefensible, this attraction. And not just those kind of people, serial killers. They get more coverage than whoever won the Nobel Prize this year, or who, a Pulitzer Prize in Literature is nothing compared to grab a reporter who actually got in there and got to interview this guy right after they caught him after he just killed 14 kids. That's excitement. And it seems to be indefensible. I just bring it up because, or on the basis, that if any of you want another way to see that, historically, people's been defending themselves. Somebody say, yes, I was an eyewitness to what Nero did. But not now. When I was there, that didn't mean that I approved of what he did. If I could have done anything, I would have stopped him. But if you're interested, I could write my memoirs, or I could appear later over at the Senate and over at the Coliseum. If we got a few shekels in it, and I'll tell you what happened. In half of Rome, those that didn't get burned up, go, well, hey, let's go over there. I'd like to hear that. But there is a kind of civilized conservativeness still to life that makes those same people go, well, of course, I'm not really interested in that old goddamn fat madman that like to kill us all, but, geez, honey, let's go over there. There's nothing else on TV tonight, and let's just hear what went on. It is the villains, the apparent villains of history, that still attract people that they cannot defend it. It is just the villains, the opposition. And now, of course, don't look to Neros and Hitlers and all that. Look to the opposition that keeps the balance of things growing. But it appears to be a great, inexplicable attraction even to the villains that, I guess they would say, that we, the civilized, love to despise. That we properly hate. But how can I hate them properly unless I know a little more about what they did? One more time, I repeat, this is not limited to Neros and Attilas. Every day, that which apparently is in opposition to civilization, to progress, to decency, any term that normally used in the city, I'll accept it. That which is opposed to that, what gets the most coverage? Bad news doesn't even need a publicist. They don't have to hire a PR man. It's only somebody that wrote a book about everything I know I learned out behind the barn. What appears to be bad news, what appears to be the villainous actions in life requires no PR. You do not have to have an advance man for Lucifer. I mean, if you hear he's going to show up, the world will turn out. Need I say, I was going to try another paragraph on you, but need I say that there might be some use for that. Inasmuch as look where your thinking ordinarily has taken you. Look why some of you laugh in such a ratty manner at the Kairouts. I say ratty manner. Many times I hear the laugh like, I would have thought of that. I'd have thought of that. There is a kind of continuity that is necessary to stay sane at the city level, to serve out your purpose, to transform and transfer your energy, to do your dance. But there is also a sameness to it. There is a blandness to it. There is a conservativeness to it that cannot be escaped. Not at any, without some great risk to secondary health. It does not happen. And so there you are, all dressed up like little Lloyd Fauntleroy, put out there on a dance floor, and like your mother and father are both big old fat conservative redneck wigs, and they're telling you to do the minuet. to do a waltz with another nice little girl, if you're a boy. And internally, many people's minds are crying out, where's Bill Haley? When are they going to invent rock and roll? When can I pull off these old clothes and get some gold chains or bell bottoms? When can I be hip? You can't be. And so you have that kind of, I think they're still pleased to call it in the city, some sort of struggle going on. But the struggle is not about to be won by new, exciting, fresh, disturbing ideas. All they got to do is be just a little bit too disturbing. Just a teeny-weeny bit. And even those who think, I would like some excitement in my life, even they hear it, and they're suddenly out there in the streets, figuratively speaking, with their friends and neighbors, going, stamp it out. Now consider, there has been a line of continuity that you always thought of as being you, that you take as being your personality, your views, even your search for some greater truth. But as long as you are part of the ordinary continuity, I got to tell you, I mean, yes, but I feel like I'm getting somewhere. That's the problem. Wait a minute, you mean thinking I'm getting somewhere could actually be a problem? Now, wait a minute. Are you saying I should wait a minute before? No. The dance continues. Everyone picks up. Not just from other people. We're just using speech as a manifestation. It is a real one. But everyone is picking up the idea that just went before, the sentence that just went before, the segment, the train that just went by, the boxcars that went by. Everyone has to grab the one that just went by. We stand on the intellectual shoulders of the giants who have gone before. At the city level, there is nothing else possible. I feel as though I'm carrying on the great tradition of Hobbes and Locke and Johnson. Of course, I try to shower more often. But I feel as though I am carrying on this great intellectual tradition. I'm sure you are. Or you could say Buddha, Moses, Confucius. I'm carrying right along. I've read. I can see there is a line. There's a line. You can't fool me. I know it was different cultures, different times, but I can see the continuity. I can see the continuity of how this is going. And notice, perhaps many of you don't have to hold your hands, in times past, took that as being a sure sign that the gods had selected you for great things. Because everyone else considers, for instance, that Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, Judaism, all of these are different, conflicting. I mean, there are people killing each other over it. But that's the ordinary people. That's the scum of the earth. Well, it's ordinary people. It's those that the gods have not blessed with my insight, because I have read, I have studied, I even meditated once. And I see not some disjointed, conflicting camps. I see continuity. I see a certain kind of continuity. You understand? You can certainly get somewhere. And so forth. How about a little subversive? It might fit in a little bit. If it's not, we'll take the sucker and make it fit in. A little subversive archaeology. History. I was just using ordinary, historic, accepted, contemporary views, I guess. One of the first things that they would say historically, prehistory, in that era, they would say, well, surely one of the first things that groups of men, once they begin to collect and to form, which you got to do for the secondary world to start, you got to have at least two people to get together and say, hey, I'll be the north city limits and you be the south. Once you got two people, it's like you got two words, you got a language started. You got two people, you got a city. One person, not a city, you got the beginning of a state. You got the beginning of the state of, what do they call it? Consciousness. So when people began to collect, and thus the secondary world, they had to, and the secondary world began to grow, began to develop. One of the first things I think they would suggest, or I'm going to suggest it to it, and if they don't like it, the archaeologists can meet me out front. Bring the biggest archaeologist you got, too. At any rate, one of the first things they would do is trade. Now, they, of course, didn't have money, but that was not simply the point. Trading would have fit, I'm just using 3D descriptions of the way life could have worked, if we're going to believe the comic strips and caveman cartoons from New Yorker and etc., and that which you were taught in school. Trade would have helped settle all the nomadic peoples. Nobody had been settled yet, and everybody was wandering around, looking for something to eat, looking for somebody else to take away their food. You had no house, no condos, there was no development. So people were wandering, nomadic. Trade would have been absolutely necessary almost immediately for two or more people to decide to hang around with one another. It helped establish society. It helped establish the nomadic life of prehistoric man. It helped make possible the division of labor, which you've got to have. When you get a group of people together, you cannot have everyone, but that's not the most efficient, as you can surely see, of everyone trying to be self-sufficient, of everyone growing all their food, making all their own clothes, doing all their own house. That's part of. It's not the cause of, it's not the result of, but it's part of. It is coeval with the development of the secondary world. Of course, now we're talking, to start out with, on a tangible level, that the division of labor is the most efficient. It's for everyone to do one little job, or one or two little jobs. And for one person, let's say, he sticks with farming. But he takes what he farms and he trades it to this other guy and his brothers who are carpenters. And he comes over and builds a house. And the carpenters trade their work to somebody else for some clothes. Trade would be the most efficient way for that kind of stability necessary for the secondary world to grow, even metaphorically and literally. The thing with trade that I was going to ask you to consider is the ultimate in trade, once we're past prehistory, which, looking at most of you are. A couple of you got some foreheads that kind of frightening, but the trade, after we got through trading a house and some food, and tubers for a tutu, after that, the ultimate trade is, or at least should be, the trade in info. Now, in a sense, at a fairly crude level, because simultaneously with groups of men getting together with that kind of collection, that aggregate of the DNAs, enough that would form individual organisms, and then these individual organisms come together, a part and parcel of that would be that they begin to trade in a certain kind of info, but the info would have been limited to primary affairs. So the info would be one guy who is growing sweet potatoes, and he offers to trade some to the carpenters, and they say, fine, we're going to build you a house. And they say, by the way, where did you first find the seeds for these? Or how did you come up with this? And so they trade info. Or the farmer might say, I like you guys' work. I'm not trying to take your job away, but if I ever wanted to make like something of my own, some cabinets or a chair or something, what kind of wood is that you're using? Where did it come from? I don't recognize it. So they would trade in that kind of info. But now we're past that. The ultimate trade, commerce should be trade in secondary info. Now, of course, that is what our contemporary world is saying, the age of info, the age of services, that in a way that I'm not going to deny, because they say it, that the modern world is almost a world trading in info, that more people are now involved with the transfer of information than they are in heavy industries, in the very things such as the building trades, the production of clothing and food. You know, we now have, whatever it is, 300,000 farmers are feeding all the rest of us. And probably no more than 250 or 300 carpenters are building all the houses. At least they're drinking up most of the beer. And so I'm just going to take what they say, this a trade in info, that is the growing, that is even now perhaps the most important industry in the Western civilized world. That's still, of course, not what we're talking about. That is a part of it. That is a part of the growth of the city. I would suggest that what you're looking for, beyond the continuity, beyond the blandness of life, is a trade in info, except there is no market. There is no known commerce for it, because it takes two to trade. I mean, that's obvious in a three-dimensional polarized world. But if you are a buyer, there is no seller. The alternative to that, I don't care to go into. The trade, then I would suggest, can be, in a sense, facilitated. You have got to reinvent the wheel. You've got to reinvent civilization. You have got to reinvent the settling of new territories. You mean in South America somewhere? Well, I had more in mind, like in your own mind. In the brain areas of yourself, is you have got to commence a trade, a commerce that is not now market-driven. Because you are attempting to think outside the bounds of continuity, and there is no market for it. You have got to reinvent trade. Figure of speech, of course. As long as we're in archaeology and history, another little one that's not totally unrelated, you notice that there, throughout the earlier prehistory and even the earlier history of man, which I'm still just repeating, with no editorial comment, just take what they now believe, stories all the way from religious context to finding it in the artifacts and evidence of archaeologists outside religious realms, but everywhere there are these stories continually, particularly prevalent in pre and early history of man, of men making sacrifices to the gods, of things that were either of great value to them or things that they had made to be of great value. Of course, the things that are of value to them is like throwing your young chaste daughter down in a volcano to appease the gods. The other one would be, the other possibility I was saying, that's getting a little beyond the primary level. That's the obvious one, sacrificing animals to the gods. Is either sacrificing something valuable to you, that you needed those animals, you loved your daughter, or to sacrifice things that you made of value to yourself, that you made this piece of pottery and you painted it all. In some way, your soul was almost in it. Anyway, it was something that you did, and you like it, and then you go there to the temple or wherever it is, and you throw it down and break it. As crude, as conservative as all of that is, could I suggest to you that there is still some lingering energy that you can use behind that, but of course having nothing to do with actual sacrifice of people, could I suggest, or even pottery or your works of art, to go home and think, all my life I've loved books, and I collect all these books, but I don't know, I kept waiting for the gods to break off all this conservative things I think and give me some great insight, because I just knew, back when I used to take 20 bennies a day, when the gods used to talk to me, I just knew I was in for great things, and yet it hasn't happened. What I'll do, I'll go home and take all my books and I'll burn them. God, I'd hate that. I couldn't stand it. Yeah, but that shows it'd be a great idea. Yeah, but that's foolish. Look how much money you got, and some of those you never replaced. Boy, that in some way cleansed my soul. That's insane. That's more into a secondary realm than it is throwing your daughter or your mother into a volcano. But let me suggest to you a use for that, a way to look at it, even beyond all that. Not having to do with possessions, things you made, and not having to do with things that are intrinsically of value to you, like your food, your family. Could I suggest a sacrifice in the area of I had the word knowledge. Knowledge. Just throw it in the pit. Take all of your old maid, no sexist inference intended, but that is your non-virgin, since all the stories were that you had to throw in a virgin into the volcano. So nobody has virgin thoughts. Nobody has virgin knowledge at the ordinary level, so you're dealing with a non-virgin already. Somebody's already had you. If you're alive, you've been had. The time that everybody has to be a neural virgin, it was, so to speak, the difference between when you took one breath and somebody slapped you. I know used to they slap children to make them supposedly take their first breath. Of course, I hear that some doctors used to look at kids and think, God damn, and just slap them because they're so ugly, but I don't go into that. It would be, I was suggesting, a kind of sacrifice of knowledge, is to throw the mothers in the pit. All of them. That would be a sacrifice. The sacrifice that is always this sort of thing. I could take ordinary intellectual position and say, well, boy, that is so easy, it's not a sacrifice. Yeah? Except think about it this way. It's damn near impossible. Oh, no, I could sacrifice my ideas. I mean, if I had a choice, if the God says, all right, you can either cut your son's throat, you say, well, I've already read that story. All right, you can burn all your books, all your great record collection, all of your clothes. Oh, I might. Is there any other possibility? All right, sacrifice all your knowledge. No. Ordinary intelligence would think, has he been drinking? You mean that'll do it? All I got to do is sacrifice my knowledge? Yeah, that'll do. And you would think from almost any good position that, Jesus, that's the name of sacrifice. You're going to have to almost change the term from sacrifice to say, is it possible? Is it possible without doing that do-it-yourself frontal lobotomy with a Phillips screwdriver and a ball-peen hammer? How are you going to sacrifice your knowledge? I'll just take it and I'll just throw it on the floor of the temple, to the temple of new, non-sequential knowledge. I'll hurl it into the pit, as you said. I'll just throw it in. And then what would you have? I mean, you then might be, at least have done a kind of vocational training that you might, hell, become an insurance adjuster. But it would be, back to what I was saying, I was going to suggest that it would be, if you knew how to sacrifice knowledge, something of value, at the ordinary level, it would be to take it all. Forget, oh, is it a virgin? Is this worthy? Is this my best piece of work? Is that my best piece of pottery? With the gods say, wait a minute, you're holding back the good stuff. Take them all. Throw them all in there and then let God pick out what he wants. Take all the knowledge, just dump them in the pit. Except there's always another little stickler to this. It's actually sacrifice. It's not possible unless you can forget it. You understand? You knew that. You just was hoping I wouldn't say it. That if we went back to the crude level of somebody that was going to sacrifice their daughter or something not quite as traumatic, that if you felt like, well, the gods will surely smile upon me if I take all those books or all my clothes or my car, I've been so attached, that car is going to be the death of me. And so that you go out and pour gasoline all over your new Ferrari or Corvette and set it on fire. Not to do any good, but even if you're ordinary and believe that, do you understand? You got to know this because it has to do still with the ordinary continuity of energy. That's no sacrifice unless you can do it and forget it. Now you know the answer to that. There is nobody in the city that could go burn their car, that is of anything that was of value to them, and go sacrifice it for whatever reason. That I will burn up my car if the gods will only let my poor daughter live that's very ill. I'll make these kind of sacrifices. Or I feel like the gods want me to. it's not a sacrifice unless you can forget it. And you know the answer to this. Is anybody going to burn up their car? Anything, whatever it is, anything was of value to them. I don't care if it seemed at the moment that there was some sort of episodic positive, such as you burnt your car, and sure enough, the next day, your wife or your daughter made a miraculous recovery. And you were real glad. Maybe you went to church and lit a candle or lit a priest or whatever you do. And if somebody right then says, was that worth the price? And right then let's say that you were still carrying the continuity even yourself quite vividly in your brain that, all right, burning the car. I mean, it happened. I did that. And before the night was over, in less than 12 hours, she had recovered. And so if somebody said, was it worth it? You go, yeah. I mean, if they got to you real quick. But it's not a sacrifice unless you can forget it. And my question was, even though your daughter lived, now you can speak, you can answer for ordinary humanity. You're as ordinary as me and everyone else. Would that person ever forget having set their Corvette on fire? Burning all of their clothes? But then think about, throughout, as I said, history, but it's at the heart, it's woven inside the tapestry of all these religions, all kinds of philosophies and cults, and there is a energetic basis behind it that sacrifice would in some way be cleansing. It would make you more appealing to higher forces, to gods, to progress. But a man with a good memory is not capable of sacrifice. And what is one fine definition of being an upright, solid, sane citizen of the city? A good memory. Yeah. Memory gets faulty enough, and they'll put you away. Does anybody now see, we're out of tape, that another definition of memory is individual continuity? Neurally. So if you can't forget something you try to give up, if you cannot forget it, which you can at the old neural building site, then any idea of sacrifice is an illusion. That's why people cannot pursue it. They're not supposed to at the city level, but that's why no one can do it. That's why those who try to do it say, well, the result's iffy. I wish I hadn't done it if I had it to do over. Because the only way you can sacrifice is you got to be able to throw it in the pit. You got to be able to forget about it. Who can forget about the continuity of your past? All of the hardships, all of the good times, all the setbacks, yes, but all of the hope I have for tomorrow. Everything that makes me me.